Okay, I think we're good. Bring up my agenda here. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for stopping by. We're going to today what we're going to do is we're going to look at our backlog of tasks for OWS 2 Open World Server 2 development, and then we're going to go through and try to prioritize them into a roadmap. So I set up a Trello today so that we can go and do that. But before I get to that, I figured that I would do a quick thing of showing you guys the progress that I've made on the OWS Hub World MMO example projects. I'm gonna bring that up real quick, and we'll go through a few things. Start up the OWS instance launcher. Okay, so from actually what I can show you in the game itself, it's not a ton, but I'll show you what I got here. A lot of the stuff I've been working on is behind the scenes systems. So this game does not have any kind of character selection. There is a character creation process, but there's no character selection. It's the idea where there's one character per login, and it just goes to that. Okay, it's interesting. I just had it working. Cycle this. Make sure Docker didn't stop running. Docker is still running. That all connected fine. Let me try it again. Make sure it's on standalone. There we go. Oh, whoa, it actually opened two. Guess I should have just waited longer. Yeah, usually I don't have too much trouble with that. Okay, so the idea here, I'm going to grab my game controller. The idea here is that you're going to load into a hub world, which is what this block out here is. And you're basically going to have two other zones that you can transfer into. One is going to be here, and one is going to be on the other side. So the one zone here is going to be a zone in which you can transfer into the zone by yourself. You don't have to be in a group. And it's going to basically be a zone where you can fight monsters and get materials and come back to the hub. So that's what's going to be on one side. And then on the other side over here, so that I can showcase different kinds of instancing, over here, what you're going to have is you're going to have a successive sequence of dungeons. And so for this one, you're going to have to group up with 3 other players. You're going to have to be in a group of 4 people. So this will also give me the ability to have a matching system to put people together into a group so that you can, so that you can join this. And basically, it's going to be a successive system of dungeons that go forward and keep getting harder. And so then basically what'll happen is you'll only be able to, start at the one that's one further than what you've gotten to. So let's say that there's a sequence of 10 of them in a row, and you've made it through 2 of them. The thing will remember you've made it through 2 of them. And if you're the leader, you'll be able to start on 3, 3. You won't be able to start any higher than 3. And so the idea of the game will be to successively get more powerful so that you and your team can make it through, the 10, successively harder dungeons. So that'll let me be able to have, one side of the zone, which is just, an open world zone where it's instancing them so that, let's say we say, okay, 50 people can be in that zone, it'll just, when it hits that soft cap of 50, it'll spin up another one. When it, hits the next soft cap of 50, it'll spin up another one. And in that, it won't be separate groups. Then the zone instancing rules for this next one will be basically groups of 4, meaning that each group of 4 will get their own dungeon instance to go through. I'll probably set some kind of time limit or something to get through it to help add to the difficulty level, and also so that it can automatically shut down the instance after that amount of time if you were to, just sit there. So then that's what we'll be doing on this side. So as far as the character movement at this point, I don't have a ton. I do have a, which I'll show in a minute. I do have the enhanced input is set up, and the ability system is actually built into this project. So we're not using anything from OWS. In fact, there's no inheritance from OWS. Everything's custom. We're not inheriting anything from the OWS plugin. But I basically have a double jump system, and I also have a dashing system. So this is using gameplay ability tasks. If you're moving in a direction, it dashes like that. If you're not moving in a direction, it kind of does a backflip like that. You can see down at the bottom that there is the green bar, which is your health, and then there's a blue bar, which you'll see as I dash, an entire sequence goes away. If I don't have, I'm hitting there, hitting it, it's not doing anything. If I don't have at least one bar, then I can't dash. So it's basically splitting that into 33.3 and out of 100 there, and so that's how basically it's got 3 charges of dashing. So that's what I have working there. I also have see if I can find which button it is. I think it's this. So one of the other things that I'm doing in this project is that all of the gameplay abilities are built in C++, and then you're just configuring it in this project. And I'll show that in a minute. So one of the gameplay abilities that's in C++ that I came up with here is this idea of having successive, a sequence of target captures. So it's a little bit hard to see here. I don't know how, let me do it here. I don't know how well it's showing, but basically you're having at 0.1 seconds, there's a small sphere trace right in front of you. And then at 0.2 seconds, there's another one a little bit further in front of that. And then there's kind of like a larger explosion one. I think it's at 5, 10, and 15. Probably not. It's probably at 1 meter, 2 meter, and 3 meter. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, and yeah, I just have it doing a debug trace so you can kind of see it. The idea with this is that a lot of abilities, if you think about them, assuming they're short range around your character, they could be thought of as just a sequence of traces, right? So if you were to, throw something, or you were to activate some field around you, or do different things, a lot of those could be handled by traces. So the idea was, hey, we can knock out a large number of abilities just by having this sequence of traces, and along with whatever effect is playing, right? Like I don't have any visual effects playing here, but if I had some kind of effect where like maybe it shot out a fireball slowly forward in front of it, and then after that 0.3 it exploded, and that was the bigger one, then that type of ability could be captured with this. And so if you think about a lot of the kind of abilities in action RPGs, you realize, hey, a large number of those could be knocked out with just having some sequence of traces. And I'll show what that looks like. So let me go into the ability system, go to the abilities. And so what I basically have here is, you can see I have these trace steps. And so the idea is that you can have as many of these trace steps. I have a start time in seconds. So that's basically after the ability is activated, how long until this step activates. Associated gameplay effects, if you want an effect to kick off at that time. Then there's right now there's this idea of collision shapes. Right now there's only sphere traces, but eventually there will be sphere traces, cube traces, and capsule traces. And then I'm working on a separate system for doing stuff with line traces. This does not do line traces. And then you can offset it from the origin. So in this case, what was happening, it was 1 meter in front of you, 2 meters in front of you, and the final one was 3 meters in front. And then there was a radius of 50, a radius of 50, and a radius of 100. One of the things, let's see, I've got can hit self. So one of the other things that I'm working on related to this is the idea of whether each one of these kicks off a separate target collection when it happens, or whether it just takes all of them together and at the end rounds them up and said, here's all the targets collected throughout. So in some cases, you may want the idea that there are separate target collection steps, but in others, you might just say, hey, do a lot of these different traces and then just take all the targets you got, dedupe them, and put them in one output pool. So those will be the two different options for that. And then for the dashing, let's see here, dodge forward. It's basically just data here. So you've got a direction, zeros forward, a strength, a duration, a animation, and then we've got, yeah. So the other thing that I'm doing too is I'm using tags to be able to control different states. And so one of the things that you can do here, the idea is that there's two normal abilities and a special ability, and the special ability charges up from hitting with the normal abilities. But there's also the concept that if you activate a normal ability, and you're just standing there, it'll do a certain ability. But if you dodge and then do a normal ability, then a different ability fires, right? So basically, based on previous things you did, different things can happen. And so this is kind of how combos can work. Same thing with, hitting an ability once and then hitting it again within a certain amount of time. It could see that something happened recently. And so the way that it's handling that recently is through a gameplay effect that applies a gameplay tag for a certain amount of time. And so the concept here is that basically it'll wait 0.25 seconds after it activates, then it'll apply this tag, and then if we went to that tag, we could see how long what's that window of when it recently dodged that you could then hit the ability again and do a combo. And then also there's the concept of iframes. So every ability will also have a invulnerability frame period in which during that time your character is invulnerable to taking damage. So there's also that concept as well. In addition to that, we're using the new ability set stuff. So this is, if you've played with Lyra, this is similar to that. So it's a lot easier now to give your abilities to the character and apply different sets. And I won't show it, but behind the scenes, there's also a whole damage formula calculation system that I've programmed. So I'll have to expose some of that to Blueprint. If you guys have been in here in 5.1, you know about this new message right here. It says axis and action mappings are now deprecated. Please use enhanced input. And so you can see I had to remove all the mappings, and we're now using the input system. And so that's basically done by having actions. So the normal ability action that I was using was this one here. And then you basically set up configurations. So I've got gamepad and keyboard and mouse. This is where you set up the different configurations that we can have. Eventually, this will lead into, we'll have a controls input settings screen, and this will tie right into that. We've already got all the data structures for it. And then basically here is our mappings. This was for the gamepad, so I was hitting the gamepad face button right to kick off the normal ability, and for the dash, I was using gamepad right shoulder. But I could have used the keyboard as well. And then here in our input data, we connect each of these input actions from the enhanced input system, and we connect them to a gameplay tag. And then that gameplay tag is how we connect it. Is how we connect it to the abilities themselves. Hold on, I'm trying to think where that file is. Oh yeah, back here, right? So normal ability is connected to normal ability. So that's how that's being handled. It's going to make it a whole lot easier when we go to, want to set up custom, control mappings and stuff. It's just going to make that a lot easier. And then over on the character itself, you can see they tie in right here. So there's the input config for the player, and here's the ability set. And then I'm also pulling over some stuff from Lyra related to this idea of ability tag relationship mapping. So this is more around being able to control complex combos based on, is this ability running, and then someone tried to do this one. Okay, what do we do now that those two things are happening at the same time? So there's a lot of cool stuff around that. On the code side, we are not inheriting. So if I go to my HW character, we are inheriting from a character. So we're not inheriting from OWS, which means that same with our player controller. So if I come down to the player controller, it is just inheriting from a player controller. And so we do this by, if I go to player controller here, we do this by binding to the delegates that we need to. And so so this will give people a good example of how they can tie into OWS without inheriting, which is great for people who want to use something like ALS or whatever other base character and player controller they have. They'll be able to tie into it and won't have to inherit from OWS. So it just make it a lot more flexible. And then it also is nice too because it allows you to connect to them more easily in C++, whereas some of the other Blueprint nodes in the OWS 1 with the old style, it was interesting to use them in C++. Now that you've got delegates to connect to, it's super easy. So that is what I've got there. Let's see if there's anything else interesting to mention. I am working on doing stuff with the common UI system, but I do not have that working yet. Yeah, sure. So the common UI is a system that Epic built. It's a plugin. It's an optional plugin. It's actually a couple plugins. And what it does, what it seems like it does to me, again, I'm still trying to figure some of it out, is that if you've ever played games on a gamepad, so console type games, where everything is menus that like come in from the side and are overlays. So you might hit the menu button on your gamepad and some overlay like comes in from the side or different things. So what this basically does is the way that it seems like is it's like a layering system for UI where it'll keep track of what layer's on top and make sure that input is only routed to that layer, right? So basically, let's say you had, pop-up upon pop-up upon pop-up. It would make sure that input's only being routed to the top pop-up so that you can basically, use your thumbsticks on your controller to, to be able to control movement of some kind of, cursor or whatever menu system happens to be on that screen. So I don't know how much it does for mouse and keyboard, but definitely for gamepad and those type of things, it seems like it just adds a nice system. Now it does a few things additional that I haven't looked into that much yet, but it also has this concept of creating a style sheet basically, and then it will reuse that across your different UI. So rather than you having to go into every UMG widget and say, okay, I got to make sure all the buttons are the same style, I got to make sure all the inputs are the same style, it also has the concept of building like this generic style sheet. And then later when you put the control in, it just automatically pulls that style in. Right. So all your buttons would look the same, all of, the different things, rather than having to go in and do them separately. So I haven't gotten deep into that yet. There's not a ton of documentation. Still trying to go through. I got into a few weird things with it in C++ that I'm trying to figure out, but I'm going to try to get that working. My goal is that this, that this basically this entire thing will run from a gamepad, meaning Other than typing into a chat, you would never need to take your hands off your gamepad, meaning all the menus are run by gamepad. Everything you can do in the game is run from a gamepad. And so the only thing that you would have to take your hands off the gamepad for, of course, is typing in a chat. So that's the goal there. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Okay. The style sheets. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It felt very much like it was trying to standardize things. And so which probably is why it's called Common UI. So I really liked that sort of thing. So I'm sure there's a lot of, there's still reason to use it even if you're only using keyboard and mouse. To me, I just saw the huge benefit from the gamepad side of being able to um, keep track of where your inputs are going, because that is something that UMG had been really weak on, is trying to make sure that no, I don't want to keep controlling some lower level one. I only want the input to go here. So that, to me, that was the thing that really drew me to it. So yeah. Yep. Cool. Cool. Sure. That's what this is. I don't know if you did you catch the last 20 minutes? Okay, this will be, for those that don't know, this will be uploaded to YouTube. So there will be a link in Discord. So basically, the past 20 minutes, I was showing the update on the OWS Hub World MMO project. And so that'll be on YouTube. I'll get it up tonight, and so you'll be able to go back through and watch that. Sure. Oh, no problem. No problem. That's what this is meetings for. Vehicles working across server bounds. So that's, I'm not sure what entirely that means. So the first issue with vehicles is the concept of possession. Now OWS 2 has been modified. There was one spot that was problematic around possession. So it has been modified. I don't think that's an issue anymore. You'll still have to deal with it persistence wise, which is going to be interesting. And you will not be able to use the gameplay ability system implementation that's in either OWS or in the OWS Hub World MMO, because I chose to implement it on the character. So if you are trying to have the concept of you can possess and unpossess, or the concept of deleting your character and refreshing it from a brand new character, then you need to put your ability system on the player state. But that is not something that I've done here in the. I considered it for the Hub World MMO, and then I said, why have all that unneeded complication? The concept in the Hub World MMO is you're one character, you're always one character. The character can't disappear, right? Even if you were to die, it's really just the concept of your character respawning and resetting some values on your character. It's not the concept of deleting your character, right? So there would never be any point in the Hub World MMO where you wouldn't have a character, and there'd never be a point where you had more than one character. But for games that need that, and vehicle based may be a game that needs that, you're going to want to put your ability system on the player state. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, yeah. So what some games do to get around that is they'll actually put the functionality for the vehicle in the character, and all that's really happening is your character just becomes a fixture in the vehicle. Um, but but the downside to that is if you're trying to use the vehicle pawn that Epic provides, that's a separate pawn. And so that is going to create problems. So at that point, you probably would have to move to a system where you're possessing and unpossessing, which means you're going to have to move your ability system to the player state. So you would have to make a few changes, but the rest of OWS should work for that. We're primarily, when you look at the code for the Hub World MMO, you'll notice that there really isn't anything in the character anymore. So all of the stuff we're doing from the player controller. And so the good news about that is, well, it doesn't matter how many characters you have or how often you're possessing or unpossessing, because you do only keep one player controller. Epic doesn't have the concept of multiple player controllers per player. So I think that some of that will help you. You'll just have to handle a custom implementation of the ability system on that player state, which there are examples out there. My friend, I think his name is Tranek is what he goes by on Discord. I can link it to you. He has a GitHub. It's older, but it's probably still mostly good, of an implementation on the player state. So he shows like, hey, here's how you put gameplay ability on the player state. So, okay. So let me move on here. I wanted to show real quick that I did just add a new feature that pushed out a couple days ago. It's called Get Character Data and Custom Data. Let's see here. I just realized that I'm not running the newest. I'm not running the newest plugin in this project yet. Okay, hold on. We're going to open up this. So what this is for is that, and we'll be doing this in the Hub World MMO, is that there will be some things that you can pick during character creation. You'll be able to pick the color of your bot, because I'm going to actually be using the built-in bots as my character models for the Hub World MMO. You'll be able to pick your bot, and then you'll also be able to pick whether you're the male mannequin or whether you're the female mannequin. And so those will be, because they're being picked during character creation, they will be sent via a custom API. So the same kind of thing that I show in my 3-part custom API, we'll be adding a custom API for the Hub World MMO. What this means is actually that if you want to run the Hub World MMO, having the OWS 2 won't be good enough. So there'll actually be a second OWS 2 over on the Saber Dart Studios GitHub. There'll be a second one that actually has this custom API, because you'll need this custom API to be able to send the data of what color did they pick for their bot and whether did they pick male or female. But what that means is we also need a way to read that back the next time you log in if we wanted to show it. Now, I'm not currently showing it, so I actually don't know if I would need that or not. But some people may want to show it, during character selection, or maybe they just want it sitting there while it's loading. Who knows? And so basically what I've got here is I have a new, let's see here. This is binding it to the player controller, but if I go to the player controller component, here we go. And get character data. There we go. So there's basically this new call here. So this is a VP node that you can call called Get Character Data and Custom Data. You send it your user session GUID for security purposes, because we're not connected to UE4, we're not connected to the game server, and you send it the character name, and then this will basically, you can bind it back to wherever you need, and it'll return a list of, it will return your custom character data, but it will not return all your custom character data. So what you'll actually have to do is that is correct. Yeah, let me show you how you do that real quick. So there is a interface here called iCustomCharacterDataSelector, and you're implementing a method called should_export_this_custom_character_data field, and there will be a default one here, but the default one only returns the field called cosmetic character data. So if you're able to put everything that you would want to show on your character selection screen serialized into cosmetic character data, then you don't have to do anything special in your API. Otherwise, what you'd have to do is you'd have to come here and you'd have to make your own custom implementation of this, put any rules here of what returns true, and then you basically just have to come into your startup. So you'd come to your startup CS, and you would find right here. This is where it binds it at runtime, and it would say, hey, for every I custom character data selector, use default custom character data selector, and here's where you just put your class in. So if you needed to make a custom one, it'd take 5 minutes to sit there and copy the default one, change which fields you're returning, and then just come here and change this. And now it would be using your custom rules for deciding what custom character data to send back. So there's multiple reasons for that. One is for security. You may have custom character data, maybe hidden stats and stuff that you do not want your character to be able to know. And they would, of course, be able to know it if it returns when you're not connected to the server. And so it might be security reasons, but it could also just be that, hey, we've got a ton of custom character data. We're only going to use a small amount to display, maybe like hair color or whatever other, visual things you might have saved around your character. Why are we returning all the custom character data? So that's the reason it's filtered. So that is a new feature that is live as of the update. I think it was the 5th, something like that. Okay, was it Wednesday? Okay, yep. So let's move on to looking at the development tasks. So I have made a Trello, and we'll go through and talk about each of these. So the first one on the list is the OWS management website. Do you want to talk about that, Sloppy? Mm-hmm. I always called it the management console, but yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I figure what we'll probably do is we'll probably prioritize what makes the most sense to put, first. We probably won't do it all at once. We'll probably release it in pieces. Um, Keep in mind that this is mostly a site that you would use during development. I was trying to think what you might use in production, and I guess potentially you might use user management in production, right? Like somebody on your back end maybe have to sit there and handle, hey, someone says their user is messed up, or whatever it may be, whether it's password resets, who knows what it might be that you might have to deal with. But for the most part, it's a development website. It's not really something you would use in production. In fact, it would be potentially dangerous in production. So it's more just to help streamline things during development. Currently, all of those tasks you have to do by going into your database, management software and querying it manually. So that's a cool thing that Sloppy's working on. Right. Yep. Right. That's right. Yes, there are some things missing too. You can see the next two items on my list here are global data and groups. Those never got moved to OWS 2. So a lot of the things that were from OWS 1 and had screens in that management console, they don't even exist at this point. But I could still see screens being in there for managing users, managing characters, seeing the custom data on characters, some things like that. So I think there's still and of course zones, managing zones and stuff related to that. We probably, yeah, we probably still would show them there. There's going to be some reasons. We don't have to manually add them. That's right. Yep, yep, yep. That's true. Cool, cool. Uh, mhm. Yeah, there's been a few other things. There's been a few other things people have added. So, I think his name on Discord is Kivian. He's the one that did the redo for the launcher to match on GUID rather than IP. So that was pretty cool. And there's been a couple other things that people have added. So yeah, if there's anything that you're looking to work on or add or different things, just let me or Sloppy know, and we can kind of point you in the right direction or let you know if anybody else is working on that as is. That's kind of why I wanted to go through these tasks. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 Cool. In engine? No. Yeah, so I think what he's asking is instead of using some kind of web based solution for that, was having something inside the engine itself for managing that. And I yeah. It would be dangerous though. It would be dangerous for the editor plugin too though. So um yeah. I think that the main issue with that, yeah, the main issue with that is there would be a lot more work, and it's much easier. Like when you see how this Vue.js stuff works, it's much easier to build out that sort of system in a management website. Trying to do that through UMG or Slate or something like that, it would be a nightmare. It would. I know because we've done some things similar to that in our game, and it's tough. Yes, that's right. Yes, right. Yeah. Right. Was it? And that's a good point. Anything that's in the engine is constantly changing and breaking. And so the simpler we can make the OWS plugin and the points that have to connect to Unreal Engine, there's a lot less time spent on maintaining that. Whereas web, I mean, basically the web hasn't changed in 15 or 20 years, so that probably would have pretty low you know, needed to. We're not going to need to modify stuff that often if we go that route. So, okay. So the next item on here is the migrate the global data APIs to OWS 2. So that was a API that was in OWS 1, and basically it was just like a global dictionary. So it was meant to be a place to store stuff that wasn't related to a character. People were using it. The best use that I saw was people were using it to store stuff related to a zone. If there was any persistent data related to the zone, what they would do is they would just create a key called the name of the zone, and then they would just serialize their JSON to it and store it. So it was really useful. I think I may end up using it in the Hub World MMO. Um, the only reason it didn't make it to OWS 2 is that because it would only take a few hours to move it. But the reason it didn't get moved is that it did not belong in any of the current APIs. It didn't belong in instance management. It didn't belong in character persistence. It needs its own Docker server. So that would be most of the work, would just be creating a blank Docker server. Once you did that, I think there's only 2 or 3 API methods. It would only take an hour or two to move over. So it is something that I want to tackle in Q1. I think I'm going to need it for the Hub World MMO, and it's a relatively low. I think I could probably do it in 6 to 8 hours, do the whole thing and test it and everything. So that is something I want to get done in Q1. You could put configuration stuff. You can also store things. So it's also a real time API. So if you needed to store something that was unrelated, I'll give you another example. Someone was using it for in OWS 1. They were using it for guild inventory. Because the guild wasn't related to a character, right? So it's like, now where do I put this? This isn't related to a character. And so basically what they were able to do is they were basically able to use some kind of system where it was guild name inventory, and that was the name of the field. And so then those would be unique. And then they basically serialized the inventory into the data field. So it's a global dictionary. It's kind of a spot you can put data when there's not some other system that could handle it. So I think it's mhm. Yeah, right, 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 yeah. It would be a nice simple if someone were looking at, hey, I really just want to look at something as a template to learn from. It's very very simple, and so it probably would be a good one to look at. Yeah, they are. They are. Yep. Okay, the next one is the groups API. So this also did not get moved to OWS 2, kind of for the same reason. It was like, this really doesn't belong in character persistence. This really doesn't belong in instance management. So it kind of needs its own API. And so I think that the groups are going to have to go in their own API. And this is also something I want to get done for Q1. I definitely need this in my Hub World MMO because I need to be able to create those groups that are going to get assigned to the dungeon instances. So I'm going to need that. It'll be the same. Initially, it'll be the same API calls that were in OWS 1. You know, basically that you can use groups for parties, raids, guilds. It's just a persistent group. It persists permanently. It's not something that that resets when you log out of the game. It's a permanently persisting group and basically just a collection of players for whatever need you might need it for. And so that is something I also want to get moved over in Q1. Okay, the next one is called World Server Pools. So basically what this is so in my mind, the most important feature in Open World Server is the instancing, right? I mean, there's other stuff for persistence and things like that, but to me, when I think of Open World Server, I think of the OWS Instance Launcher and the ability to spin up instances and manage those instances. And so one of the things that is related to that is the need to be able to manage instances. And not all instances are necessarily created equal. As I mentioned in the Hub World MMO, we're going to have some instances that'll be these open world instances and other instances that are these dungeon instances. And so in the case that these basically the hardware running these instances is limited, we may want to set different rules around those. And so we're going to need to have this concept of having our different world servers split up into pools, right? And so let's say we go to Amazon AWS and we get 10 EC2 servers. We may be like, okay, 3 of those are going to be for dungeon instances, and then these other ones are going to be for the hub world, and then the rest of them will be for the open maps, right? And so the idea here will be that when you go into the world servers tab in the management website, you won't just see a list of the world servers, you'll see them grouped by the pool that they're in. And then you'll be able to set settings related to those pools, like such as how long does it have to be empty before it shuts down? What are the different maximums and minimums related to those things? So the idea will be that you don't just have all your world servers in one pool, but you have the ability to split them up into different pools with different rule sets, which is going to become even more important because one of the other things I want to add is world server hardware provisioning. So this is the concept that your world server list isn't pre-decided, meaning that you can basically give OWS your credit card and it can purchase hardware for you on the fly. So this is something that's probably going to be further in the distance, but it is something that I want to work on. Initially, I'm going to implement it for Azure, but as everything else, it will be implemented as an interface. And so people will be able to go into OWS and go, okay, I want to create one version for Amazon. I want to create a version for Google. And they'd be able to do that relatively easy as long as they knew the SDK for those specific platforms. And we'll have to have some things around it like maximum spend and different things to make sure it doesn't go crazy and just start charging you a ton of money. But the idea there is to be able to not just spin up server instances at runtime, but actually spin up physical hardware at runtime. Yeah, right. Yep. Yep. So then the next one here is converting the database to use parameterized queries instead of stored procedures. And Canis Helix, he's not on here. He's actually been already doing this. He's already converted a few. If you look back at the check-ins, you'll see that he's converted a few already. We did get stuck though on some complicated ones, and so he and I are researching transactions. So when you use stored procedures, it's really easy to use transactions. Once you switch to separate parameterized queries, transactions get a lot more complicated. So we're researching best practices on that so that we can continue to convert the database to use parameterized queries instead of stored procedures. The goal here is really just compatibility with more databases. I mean, in many ways, the stored procedures are faster, and they've got other few things going for them. But by having them all as parameterized queries, it's going to be significantly easier to add new database technologies, and so I think it's worth doing for that. Okay. Yeah. 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 It'll make it a whole lot easier to be compatible between them. Yep. And one of the things that Canis Helix actually did too to help that is actually on the queries side, he split out a separate one called basically generic, meaning that hey, if the query is going to work for all of our database types, we don't necessarily have to make a specialized one for each type. So that's a plus too, because that's less code to maintain. So yep. The next one is splitting the OWS 2 database into separate data stores for microservices architecture. So what we've done on the .NET side is we have split out, we've got our instance management API, we've got our public API, we've got our character persistence API, and now we're talking about adding a global data API and a groups API. The problem is, and that's great on that side, that gives us a ton of flexibility. The problem is they're all still pointing to the same monolithic database. And so we're not really getting any of the gains, the performance gains, from having a microservices architecture until we can get them into separate data stores. So over time, this isn't going to happen right away, but over time, the idea will be to take those databases and split them out into separate data stores per API, right? So the global data will only be a global data database. The groups will only be a groups database. Now, it does mean that there is some duplication of data, but this is where we use RabbitMQ and the concept of eventual consistency to make sure that if there is duplicate data between the two, that they're eventually consistent. So that is something that we want to move toward. It's gonna take a while to get there. I'll let you talk about this next one here, Sloppy, with some of the ideas for a new chat server system for OWS 2, and talk about why the OWS 1 isn't. I'll talk real quick about why the OWS 1 isn't working, then I'll let you cover the OWS 2. So the problem with the OWS 1 chat system is that it used the UE server as the way to distribute the chats. So meaning the UE servers would talk to the database to get the chats, but then the UE server was the one that was distributing it to each of the people that needed it. Now, the reason that we did this is because in our game, we needed to have proximity chat. And so it needed to know where everyone was and only distribute chat messages as far as someone's voice would travel in the actual game. And so that's why we did it that way. The downside to it, which is huge, is that significantly reduces your max player per server count because you're using the UE server to distribute all these chats and send all these extra RPCs that you wouldn't need if it was separate. So you want to tell how the new one works, Sloppy? I saw a yeah, you had a graphic that showed how they were going to be distributed. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, gRPC has it has a bi-directional feature that doesn't exist in the normal HTTP. So it's perfect for a chat server. And what this new chat server will do as well is it'll be connecting directly to the clients. So meaning it'll bypass the UE server completely. Now we still need for our game, we still need proximity chat. And so what we're going to have to do here is that in addition to this chat server, we're going to also develop a custom API that you could optionally use or not use that is going to attempt to in real time keep a basically a location of everyone in the game in memory on this server so that the chat server can query it quickly and change the distribution of the chats based on proximity. We're still going to try to keep that proximity stuff in there. We're just going to have to do a lot more work because UE was able to easily go, hey, who's in a radius around this person chatting and distribute it to them. That's easy to do in Unreal Engine. It's a little bit harder to do it at this level, but it's still something we're shooting for. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and even any of those costs wouldn't be paid by the server because it's completely bypassing the UE server completely. So the goal here is that you'll end up with a much higher max player per server count by not having to use the server for chat at all. So that's our end goal. Okay, I'll do the next thing here. The new inventory API. I put a question mark here, and the reason I've put a question mark is I do think that it's something we'll get to eventually. But what I'm currently doing in the Hub World MMO is I'm seeing how far I can take doing inventory through custom character data. And so I'm seeing how far that can go before I even think about doing a separate inventory system. And then what I'll do from that is I'll determine the weak points. I already know what a few of them are going to be, but by building it out through the custom character data system, I'll be able to more easily see what the issues are with that, and then that will better guide building an inventory API. So right now, that one is not something I'm going to be dealing with right away. Okay. Adding a new API to dynamically create zones. This is something a few people have asked about. Usually it gets asked in relation to player housing. Various systems, whether it's the concept of a player having their own housing instance, or whether it's the concept of having dynamically created city blocks that multiple houses are in. People have asked, hey, is there some way that we can have the Unreal server create zones on the fly? Currently, there's not, but that is something that people have asked about. So that's something we might look into. Other people have asked about a new API to get custom character data one field at a time. So currently, it just returns all of it. Now, there are two now. There's that one that returns the filtered set when you're not connected to Unreal Engine server. So I guess that is a filtered set, so that's not all. But the only one that is in Unreal Engine currently returns all the custom character data. Now, usually that's not an issue, because normally what would happen is that you would want all the custom character data to load once when you log in to a UE server, and then you wouldn't need to pull it again until you logged into another UE server. So usually that's not an issue, but there might be some special cases for people where they're like, hey, I'm doing something a little bit different here. I've got now, because now we're storing everything in custom character data. So all the character fields are going away, and everything's going to be in custom character data. At some point, that can start to be a lot of data. Maybe there's a special case. So that's something we may look into. It is relatively small. Yes, yeah. This you would have to be on the server. That is correct. That is correct. This would have nothing to do with that new. Yeah, yeah. This would not have anything. Yeah, this wouldn't have anything to do with the new get character data and custom character data that's pulling from the character selection screen. Yep. Okay, the next one here is Sloppy has suggested that we add DB up to OWS 2 to more easily manage database updates. So if you've done database updates currently, you know that you have to go in and find the scripts and then run them in a certain order. I think there's only 2 scripts right now, but as more and more add up, it'll become more and more complicated. And so this DB up is kind of a built-in system in .NET that it can just automatically run those, keep track of which ones you have and which ones you don't have, and just run the ones you're missing. So hopefully that's something we can look into. It'll just make updates easier. Improve logging throughout OWS. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. The next one is just general improving of logging. I'm going to drop this in Q1. It's not something that necessarily is ever done, but it is something as I'm looking through things and as I'm using them for the Hub World MMO, I'm going to continue to improve the logging. Sloppy has set up Kibana, so we now have stuff going there. So it's going to be a whole lot easier to see all that in one place now that there's multiple services and multiple different places. They'll all be going to that central location, and so the goal is just to improve that. It's going to make it a lot easier when people come in to the channel and, hey, I'm having trouble with such and such. We can just be like, hey, share your log. Otherwise, we don't really know what's going on. Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think mostly what we're missing is just sending more data to it to make it more helpful. So that's something as I'm looking through things, I'll be just adding stuff to it as I see things missing. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Then there's the cleanup old character data fields. So as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to remove pretty much all of the fields from the character table. So if we were to come in here and look at the character table, you can see that it's pretty huge. The original list here was actually made by combining the fields from World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy 14, and one other game. I can't remember. And then a few that people had asked for. The idea then was that people couldn't control, they didn't, people weren't running their own APIs. And so they couldn't go in and easily create things. And so the idea was to just have lots to choose from. But now that we're doing everything through custom character data and now that people can modify their own API, pretty much all of this is going away. I mean, we're still going to have in the character, we're still going to have their character name. We're still going to have the map they're on. We'll still have their location and rotation. We might keep a few other things here, but all the rest of this data, it's all going away. And what will happen in the OWS starter project is that I will just take that same data set that matches this and I will serialize it all to JSON so that for people using the blueprint implementation of the open world starter project, it'll just work as is. They'll still have access to all the fields. They just won't realize that instead of them going to characters, they're now being routed to custom character data. For those of us who are using a custom integration of OWS like we're doing in the Hub World MMO, we will just build our own custom. I can go in here and show you an example of this. So if I go over to our character, hold on, I gotta go to the H file. So you can see here that basically what I've done is you can create these structures and you can create different groups of these structures based on when you want them to update, because they update as a group, not as individual values. And so the idea here is that when you create a custom integration to OWS, you'll create these groups of data points related to your character. And then all we're doing is we're just serializing and deserializing them. So that's the idea that we'll be using for custom integrations going forward. And so there won't need to be anything on the character itself, which is great because it's going to make that a lot simpler table, and it's also going to make it so that it's all custom per game, and we don't have to deal with all those basically null fields sitting out there. Yep. Right. That's right. Nothing will have to change. Nothing will have to change in the API or the database to be able to support whatever set of data points you need. So that's the goal there. Okay, this last one here is actually something I am already working on because I need this for the Hub World MMO. So there was a demo I had done many years ago where I showed that you could see things moving across server boundaries. And I was using a system that was built into the engine called Message Bus. I did not know that that wasn't a real system. It was just someone playing around in the system and it got checked in. So Epic finally realized that a few updates back and said, hey, this isn't supposed to be in the engine. We're deleting it. So they've removed the message bus. And so I had removed this. But there is still a need for communicating certain events and workflows between server instances. I'm going to give you an example of the one I need right now in the Hub World MMO. Is that, let's say that you are on one server instance and your friend is on another server instance and you want to invite them to your group. There's no way to do that because all that you can do is use the Unreal Engine server to send RPCs back and forth, but RPCs do not go between server instances. So there has to be something that sits outside of those servers to communicate messages between those servers. So basically what this will look like is that you'll send an RPC up to your server instance to say, hey, I want so-and-so to join my group. It will then see, hey, that person is not on this server. They can't join your group. And it will then send an API message through a new API in OWS 2 to the other server instance that will then go, oh, yeah, I have that person. You want them to join the group? Okay. And then it will be able to have them join your group. So there's certain events like that that are very common in many games, such as things around groups or other interactions between players that are not on the same server instance. And so there's going to be a new API around that. It's going to be built in a generic way that you can pretty much just make up whatever message you want and send data. So think of it as kind of like you're going to send a message name and a serialized data packet. And you can use it for whatever you want. So, but built in, it'll basically just have a way for one server to send those messages out and then have a way for the other servers to consume those messages. So that's how it's going to work. So that's sure. I did not see that. No, it's not based on that idea. I'll take a look. I didn't see that in Lyra. I wonder though what all that does. Okay. I'll take a look. Yeah, I'll take a look because they removed the old message bus. It never actually supported going between different devices. So if you went into the code, it had a spot for it. But if you went into the code where it was supposed to connect to another IP, it was empty. It just said implement me. So when I was showing it, I was doing it through a memory interface between the two. But if you had ever tried to do it across actual servers, it would have failed. So nobody ever built any of that. I'll check and see what they did in Lyra and see if they created something like that. I don't think we want to use that, even if they did. But I'll check and see what they're doing. What I want to do is do it through a system in OWS that's able to track all of those and distribute all of those and have more of the. Right now, the servers don't really communicate with each other at all. I mean, they kind of are able to pull from the same data store, but they're not really able to send anything. They're all just listening. All the servers instances are really just listening to OWS. They're not really doing any type of real time sending to OWS for the purpose of it then going to some other server. And so that's something I want to improve because I think there's a lot of uses for that. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for letting me know about that other though. I have been looking through some of the stuff in Lyra. That's where I've been trying to get info on the common UI stuff and a few other things. So I have been looking at it, but I hadn't seen that, so I'll take a look. Yeah, wait to see for something on that. I haven't seen anything much on the Iris yet. I'm very hesitant about new systems that Epic adds now because they don't have a great track record. So until I see a lot of buy-in on something, I'm not really going to move toward it just because I can give a huge list of all the things they've created in the past 5 years that they've abandoned. So we'll see. Hopefully this will be something permanent. I know. I really thought we'd have gRPC running in OWS by now. So I'm disappointed about that. I don't know. I don't really want to jump into us doing our own gRPC implementation, but unfortunately, if they don't add it, yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it'll be a lot of work keeping it updated. Yeah. It would just be great if Epic. Right. Right. Yep. Yeah. I was hoping they would do it. So yeah, we'll see. I'd like for them to manage it. I'd like for it to be something that's in the engine. If we go too long and like they're just like, oh no, we're never gonna add it, then we may have to look into it directly. But I'm still hoping they do it because that would just keep a lot easier for us. Yep, yep. Yes, offload the maintenance. That's exactly right. One of the things you realize is that maintenance becomes a huge issue, especially when the engine's updating all the time, and the less third-party things we have to rely on, the better. So that is all the tasks. Mhm. Yeah, we're constantly having to. I mean, I have to fix something almost every update. So the less things are relying on, the better. Yep. Okay, that's all the tasks that I have listed here. Is there anything anyone else would like to add and get on this list? Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, sure, sure. This is just for OWS specific. Is there anything else that is in this column here that anybody's like, I really, really need that? They aren't really anything related to OWS. I did show how to do mounts one way in my Let's Make an MMO in UE4 tutorial, which was basically just to have the we used a horse. Somebody actually made it for us. I can't remember what her name was, and she made a horse for us. I think it was a unicorn actually, and we were able to have it just basically be another mesh on the character, which is a common way that games do that. If you look at a lot of games, it's not a separate character. It's not something separate. They're just throwing another mesh underneath it and changing the way the things work. That's not really related to OWS though. So OWS, I'm not really trying to make something that helps people make games. That isn't really the goal of OWS. I mean, in a way, it does that, but the main goal of OWS is server instance management, so that you can make larger worlds in Unreal Engine and other engines too. So there are actually two people have contacted me within the past 6 months or so, and one of them is using it for Unity, and another one's using it for CryEngine. So I thought that was interesting. They were like, "Hey, are we allowed to use it?" I'm like, "Hey, it's MIT license. Do whatever you want with it. I don't care." So it can be used for others. Yeah, yeah, yep, yep. So primarily that. Go ahead. Yeah, yeah. And as much as possible, I would like to. I know a lot of people are used. This is the reason I haven't done it. Is I know a lot of people are still going through the UE4 tutorial series because it does actually still work in UE5, and a lot of people are still doing that. And so I'm hesitant to change the OWS starter project and change the plugin, but at some point it's not going to work anymore. At some point we're going to move this too far, and all that's going to break. Hopefully at that point I'll already have the Hub World MMO example project out there. I can point all those old videos to the new stuff, and at that point I'd really like to pull almost everything out of the OWS plugin, so that the only thing that's left in the plugin is pretty much the OWS player controller component and nothing else. So the character classes would all go away. All the game playability system stuff would go away. The player controller would go away. We would have to keep the game mode, but there'd basically be like two or three things in the whole plugin. I'd really like to eventually get there, just because I want the plugin to be nothing but connecting to OWS 2. So we're not going to get there right away, and I don't want to break. I know there's a lot of people who are still using a lot of that and stuff, so I don't want to break all that right away. But that's where I'd like to get to eventually, where the plugin really only has the player controller component and the game mode and nothing else. Everything else goes away. Yeah, it'll just make it a whole lot simpler. Especially for maintenance. Like almost everything that's broken recently has been that custom character movement component that they're constantly breaking, or something related to game playability. So every time I have to upgrade 5.1 and 5.2, I'm sure there'll be more things. If it was just the character, the player controller component and the game mode, it very likely would go multiple versions before it ever needed any updates. So that would be nice too from a maintenance standpoint. Yep, exactly. Don't have to keep dealing with maintenance. So that's everything I have. Is there anything else? Okay, great. Yeah, if anybody thinks of anything, throw it in the channel. I've got this Trello. This is out here. It's public. I'll link it in one of the channels, maybe the OWS FAQ channel, and as more stuff comes up, we'll just keep adding it to our backlog here, and see what different priorities people need, and how we can move stuff forward. Uh, oh, I'm sure. I mean, this was just everything from my list and your list. That's all this was. So. Yep. Yeah. I agree. I agree. Yep. Yeah, so the only reason I'm not doing that is because my goal is to initially show people in the Hub World MMO how to do it with the custom character data. And so that's why I kind of have the question mark after the inventory API. Really, that may only happen if I realize that doing it through the custom character data is really bad. And so I'm definitely going to do that first. And I agree with you. I agree. Inventory is something that gets mentioned almost every day. So I definitely agree with you that that's what people are looking for. But my hope is to show them a method with the Hub World MMO example project that uses the custom character data, and that they can just do that. And it won't really take any development on the OWS 2 side, really just a good example of showing them how to do it in the Hub World. Now, if I end up finding out, hey, this is really bad, you really can't do this in production, and here's the reasons why, then that's when I think we'll have to go over and look into a better inventory system. One of the potential things that could happen in that inventory system, which is why it's going to be really complicated, is that what we may determine, and this gets really ugly, is what we may determine is that inventory API system runs separate from the Unreal server, which creates some really interesting out of sync data. Um, but if done a certain way, it could significantly increase max player per server count. So that's kind of what I have in mind behind that new inventory API question mark. But I'm not going to go there unless we really need it. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Thanks everyone for coming.